overall, when I look at the growing percentage of Democratic voters who have turned their backs on Biden, I don't blame them. And in fact, I'm definitely one of them.
So, Anna, have you decided you're not voting for him in the fall, or what do you think? How are you thinking about that?
I will not vote for Joe Biden under any circumstance, even if he were to end the war right now. I think what he has demonstrated over the last 6 months has been absolutely deplorable, unacceptable, and I could never.
Even if he could end the war tomorrow.
Support it. That doesn't mean I support Trump, but I would never cast a ballot for Joe Biden.
Yeah, I mean, I'm very much in the same place. And it's Kyle actually in a private conversation said they basically have us checkmated, because I think still even now, like when election night comes, it's not like if Trump were to win, like I would find that horrifying.
Yeah.
And I do think, especially
for Palestine, not least of all, right? Because I know the problem is, and I already know where this is going, so I'm just going to say it. If you believe, and if you reported on Israel and Palestine the way that Crystal and Kyle and TYT have for the last 6 months, you would think the difference between Biden and Trump is Hitler and Hitler light. And I don't know if I would vote for Hitler light. So it makes sense. It's like it's a logical conclusion of what they're pushing. But I don't think these guys just don't understand. I feel like, especially when I see, I know Jank's not here, but if it's on TYT or the way Kyle and all them talk about it, the difference between, the problem is that when you use the word genocide again, like, and that's your starting point, it's that you can't really get higher than genocide. It doesn't get worse than genocide. But the problem is I don't think a lot of these people understand how much worse what's happening in Gaza could be compared to what is happening now. Like if Israel actually had the intent to go out and exterminate the people of Gaza and the West Bank, or even just Gaza, like with the abilities that they have, because I think actually when it comes to legal precedent, the way that you act in proportion to the capacity that you have is taken into account. That has been it's been a metric that's been, or like a parameter that is actually considered when they're doing genocide cases in the ICJ. So when you look at Israel's capacity, like there are 1.5 million people in Rafah right now. Israel could take them all out in like 48 hours if they wanted to. They could just go there and sweep the entire place. And obviously people like I know Jenk says this, I don't know if the other three say this, they would say that Israel's not doing that, and they're actually sometimes aborting strikes and sometimes opening corridors and sometimes allowing aid in. And now I think the number of food trucks that's come in even just yesterday is like close to 400, as opposed to the average of it being 70 before the war. They've been like, but that's all plausible deniability. So in order to do their genocide, they're going to do a bunch of things that you wouldn't do if you were committing genocide to make it look like they're not committing genocide, whilst they can actually commit, basically just to kill as many people as possible without losing international support, which is such a strange inference to make from Israeli policy. But it actually does make sense that if you believe what these guys do, because it would make it feel like just out of nowhere. It would be like if Biden was exactly the same as he is now, but he started supporting Putin. That's how these guys see it. Or if he started supporting Assad, right? I don't know. I feel like I'm doing like the Kyle Kalinske approach to Brianna Joy Gray, like when he was taking Brianna Joy Gray down on her third party thing. It's just like, if you look at all the differences between the Biden administration compared to what Trump would do, like we know that Biden very, very early on in the war was the one who was on the phone for hours to Netanyahu after Israel received false intelligence that Hezbollah were actually planning an imminent attack after October 7th. I took notes from this as well. Yeah, they like at the beginning, the Israeli officials actually had bad intelligence that said that Hamas was in cahoots with Hezbollah for October 7th. Like Hezbollah knew about it and they were involved in it in their own way. And also that an attack was imminent. And there were Israeli officials, I think it was Yoav Gallant especially, who was actually ready to go to war with Hezbollah. And Biden was on the phone, was it 3 times a day, trying to convince Netanyahu and to stay that course. Now, maybe Israel would have stayed the course anyway, but we know that one of the people who was a very loud voice against that action was Biden. Whereas Trump's rhetoric for this entire war has just been, you've got to finish the war. You got to do it. You got to get it done quickly. That's been Trump's rhetoric since the beginning. Like if Israel had gone to war with Hezbollah in October at the same time as going to war with Hamas, that would have been absolutely fucking horrible. Like that would have been horrible for Israel and for Lebanon and Gaza. It would have been horrible for like everyone involved. And then not to mention the fact that Biden has actually been instrumental in Israel's decisions when it comes to opening those aid corridors up in the north, and the fact that the number of aid trucks has gone from like around 70, 80, 90, 120-ish a day to the last few days where they've gone over like 200, 300, maybe even 400. So that's also been part of like Biden's very vocal stance against Israel. Biden has been the one who said that if Israel does not fulfill its international obligations, which is a legal obligation, to facilitate the passage of humanitarian aid through the Gaza Strip, especially in the north, that they would see a change in U.S. policy. And that kind of threat, I know it doesn't sound like much if you're not familiar with the history, but an American president has not spoken to an Israeli prime minister like that since 1991-92, since Bush Sr. threatened to withhold loan money in exchange for a settlement freeze. It's a big shift. The fact that there are currently policy reviews happening in the State Department over whether or not America should recognize a Palestinian state, like right now. The fact that there was the humanitarian sea corridor opened, again, all compared to Trump. Trump is saying, get the war done. He's not cautioning against going into Rafah. He's not drawing like lines. He's not being massively vocal about Rafah. He's not saying that we're going to change policy if Israel does not meet its humanitarian obligations. They're not doing that. They're like, Trump would have said, finish the war. Trump has never spoken about aid. He's just said that the war wouldn't have happened if he were president. And not even to mention what he would support outside of a war, because Trump keeps saying, let's go to peace. Well, what was Trump's peace? You just need to look at the picture. We know that Biden, in terms of a two-state solution, would back something along the lines of the Clinton parameters. That's like been the status quo for the Democrats since the 2000s. Trump, as we know, wanted to turn Palestine into this disgusting, disconnected fucking leopard print of a map. You can even notice here, Jerusalem. Trump said that he wanted to offer Jerusalem to the Palestinians, like East Jerusalem as a capital. But what he actually meant by Jerusalem was not East Jerusalem. It was a suburb on the edge of East Jerusalem, which Trump said the Palestinians could take and they could just change its name to Al-Quds. That was Trump's Palestinian capital in Jerusalem. This plan also involved a population transfer. It involved actually like an ethnic cleansing of Palestinians who live in the Triangle. Palestinian Israelis who live in places like Kfar Qasim, and getting them all just shipped over into the West Bank. This plan was horrible. It was like and again, Palestinians were never going to agree to this. This was going to be forced upon them if Trump had his way. He recognized the occupation of the Golan Heights as legitimate, the first leader in the world ever to do so, to the point that the right-wing government, Netanyahu's government, was so happy that they built a settlement in Golan called the Trump Heights. I mean, you can go on for quite a while about how pronounced these differences are. And but the problem is that I don't really know why I would have it feels so weird making the argument this way, because I don't really know how you convince people who think, well, Biden's is just genocide light. I mean, you have to understand that even if you buy the genocide thing, then you have to concede that genocide happens on a massive spectrum, where you've got one political leader who is quite vocal about the humanitarian situation, is drawing like certain unofficial lines, at least along limits that Israel can cross, otherwise they'll face a change in American policy, versus like, what else did Jared Kushner said that he wanted to invest in real estate in Gaza. Like, the fuck? And even if you think that's still genocide light, well, I'm sorry, like, there are 1.5 million people in Rafah. 1.5 million of them. And if all you see, when you see the difference between Biden, who is saying you cannot go into Rafah unless there's a humanitarian plan, unless there's a corridor for civilians to evacuate, unless there are measures taken to facilitate the aid situation in the north, you can't do it. Versus Trump just saying, get the war over with. There are 1.5 million people living there. And if you hear both of those scenarios, because let's say Biden can't stop Netanyahu from attacking Rafah, but let's just say he can stop Israel from doing it when there are 1.5 million people there. Let's say he can do it when they allow people to evacuate, which is already happening. People are leaving Rafah and going back to Khan Yunis. That they can do it when there are humanitarian corridors between Rafah and the other cities, when the humanitarian situation in the north is restored and a famine is averted, versus Trump's end the war as quickly as possible. If you see those two scenarios and all you think is, well, that's just two genocides, then you don't care about Palestinians. You don't. you're just grandstanding to, I guess, an audience that thinks it's principled to not vote.